Good morning, everyone. It's May the 2nd, 2024. This is Craig Studnicki from ISG World and Related ISG, presenting our Q1 update of the Miami Report, more particularly our forecast for 2024. I'm starting this particular Miami Report on a bit of a melancholy note, as we are 2 months and 3 years away from the anniversary of the tragedy of Champlain Towers from Surfside, Florida. It has been a while. Every time I mention the 3-year milestone, most people raise their eyebrows because time does seem to go by rather quickly. But it hasn't gone by that fast for us folks in real estate here in South Florida, because what happened 3 years ago in Surfside has affected our lives, and I'm about to show you exactly how. The state of Florida perhaps overreacted, but nevertheless reacted to that tragedy, and have imposed some new restrictions, requirements, regulations on existing condominiums and how they're managed and how they're inspected. Effective January, some 8 months from now, we have a lot of new rules that are being put in place. Here's some now. If a building has been, the milestone inspections basically mean structural integrity inspections that are conducted by licensed architects and engineers and supervised on a county level. So these aren't towns or cities in various counties. Now, this would be Dade County, Broward County, Palm Beach County, as an example of South Florida. And some of the restrictions, regulations are on your screen now. If your building's within 3 miles of the coastline, every 25 years from the date your certificate of occupancy was issued, you have to have your building inspected. And then thereafter, every 10 years. Effective January next year, there are no condominium associations in the state of Florida that are permitted to waive reserve for requirements. This is really key because a lot of mortgage lenders are no longer fancying these condos that are north of 30 years of age, because most of these condominium associations do not have sufficient cash reserves in the reserve for replacement accounts pursuant to these new regulations imposed on us by the state of Florida as a result of what happened in Surfside 3 years ago. How has that affected our inventory? And how does it really affect the way we realtors in South Florida are doing business? Well, let me walk you through it. And it starts with a story about the Pareto principle. Most of you have heard of it. For the brokers that are watching this presentation, you know that 20% of your realtors are producing more or less 80% of all the sales volume every year. For the human resource directors that might be watching this program, you know that 20% of the employees of any company create 80% of the issues. It's always the same few. If you're part of IT, you know that 20% of all antivirus software protection programs solve 80% of the viruses out there. Isn't it amazing how the 80-20 rule works? Well, the same rule has insinuated itself into our business. Look at this chart. A year ago, at the end of Q1 of 2023, we said there were 8,400 units for sale in Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County. These are all condos in Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County. We didn't age them. We don't care where they are. Some could be on the beach. Some could be on the bordering the Everglades. All points in between. There were just under 8,500. And I said, that's kind of low. Because prior to 2020, we always dealt with somewhere between 22 to 25,000 condos for sale, Tri-County and MLS. Well, let's fast forward to Q1 of this year. We added another 10,000. You're up to 18,704. Wow, that's a lot of inventory. We should relax because we have plenty of inventory to receive all these people that are moving here from all 4 points of the United States for all different reasons. Well, let's go back to Pareto and let's slow down those expectations. Because what we did was we took the time to age these condominiums. And when you look at this next chart, over just about 80%, actually 82% of all the condos currently listed in MLS are 30 years and older. What happened was a year ago when these two ugly words started being repeated over and over and over again, special assessments, special assessments. A lot of the people living in these older buildings are retired, fixed incomes, and they said to each other, let's call our local realtor, let's list the thing for sale, let's get ahead of this tsunami of inventory that's probably going to come on the market in older condos that are mostly susceptible to special assessments. We didn't get ahead of much because you were joined by a lot of people. There's close to 16,000 condos that are north of 30 years of age. And nobody's really interested in buying those right now because you're nervous about selling because of special assessments. They're nervous about buying for the same reason. And mortgage lenders, they don't want to touch a lot of these buildings because they know these buildings don't have sufficient cash reserves in the reserve for replacement accounts. And all these buildings now have to fill out these Fannie Mae approved questionnaires. And the one line item that causes almost every one of them to fail are cash reserves in the reserve account. So we've seen a lot of inventory grow in MLS for condos, but for 2024, it's almost useless, almost useless. It's a pretty severe comment for me to make, except it's true. And when you look at what's remaining, you have less than 3,000 condos for sale that are less than 30 years old in the Tri-County area. Last year, I said at 8,500, we're really low. At 3,000, folks, we're talking about 3 to 4 months of inventory. In Broward County alone, but looking at this chart, there are 30 towns in Broward County. I know, I looked it up. There are 77 that are in MLS available for sale that are less than 10 years old. That's 2.5 condos per town. That's like zero. So for your clients out there that are waiting for, I don't know, an interest rate adjustment to the south because they think they found a condo they really like, they're just waiting for something, it would be foolish to wait. Because when I get to the demand part of the Miami report, you're going to realize there's no time to wait. And for sure, when you look at this research, there's no inventory. This inventory is going to be really, really important into 2024. Because this next article popped out last month in March. Florida condominium market becoming a disaster zone. They're suggesting that condo listings have increased a lot, which is true, and the prices are about to drop. It's not that so much that they're dropping, but condos that are 30, 40, 50 years old have flatlined, and they probably could drop a little bit. They probably even might drop a little bit this year. But on the other side of the scale are the condos that are less than 10 years old, condos less than 30 years old. Look at the condos that are less than 10 on this next slide. Less than 10 years old in the first 3 months of this year, they went up by 6%. You and I would take that as an acceptable annual increase. It happened in the first 3 months of this year. So here we are back to the seesaw thing. I like using seesaws as a metaphor because it kind of works. If the condos are north of 30 years of age in South Florida, once again, all mostly in reaction to what took place in Surfside 3 years ago, prices have flatlined. They might even be dropping a little. But on the reverse, any condo that's less than 10 years old, any condo that's less than 30, look at the next slide. If it's less than 30, had the same price appreciation in the first 3 months of this year. So less than 10 years old, less than 30 years old, they all went up by 6% in the first 3 months of this year. Where will prices go on this new inventory going forward? Who knows? But it's not staying flat. Wait till I get to the demand side. But before I get there, let's talk about houses. Single-family homes. We've seen an increase in inventory. At the end of Q1 last year, we were just under 9,000. Now we're just over 11,000. So we've seen modest, believable increase in that kind of inventory. Listen, we've divided these in 3 categories, an A, a B, and a C. An A house is probably some house that's less than 15 years old, contemporary architecture, on the water. It's on the ocean, it's on the Intracoastal, it's on the bay. There's less than 300 of those for sale in the Tri-County area. Not many, not a lot of time to think. There's not a lot of time to think. There's just not that much inventory. B houses, there's more of those, and they're exactly like the A's. They're just not on the water. Contemporary design, less than 15 years old, great neighborhoods, just not on the water. Where we've seen the biggest relief in the last few months is with the C houses. There's just under 10,000 of those in the Tri-County area. Average price is around $850,000. They start at like $500,000 and go to, say, 1.2, 1.3. This is a price point that most people, particularly young families that are moving to South Florida with all of the companies that are moving here, can quite easily afford. That's where we've seen a lot of relief in inventory, much needed relief in inventory. Grateful that we have it. And like condos, whether the condos were less than 10 years old or less than 30 years old, same price increase in the first 3 months. It's a strange coincidence that they all went up by the same percentage in the first 3 months. But what won't be a strange coincidence is if they all continue to follow each other as the business quarters pass on in 2024. What kind of price increases can we see? Well, let's go to a pricing forecast. I joke with a lot of people inside ISG and related ISG when I ask them, who do you think the most powerful person in the United States is? And they always say the President of the United States. Yeah, well, if you're in real estate, I say it's this guy, Jerome Powell. He's the chairman of the Fed. He controls interest rates. He controls money supply. He controls everything you buy. When he lowered the Fed rate in 2020, in the middle of that quarantine, he told us all that this was going to cause inflation, but he could only deal with one problem at a time. Well, last year he dealt with inflation by raising interest rates, and it caused mortgage rates to rise. It actually, come to think of it, it started at the end of 2022. But now, despite some unfortunate inflation news, a little bit of unfortunate inflation news, in the month of March, he doubled down. A couple of weeks ago on USA Today, I'm lowering interest rates 3 times this year. He's advertised as much as 75 basis points. Well, that will clearly affect mortgage rates. When that happens, I think the opinion of Barbara Corcoran will matter. This is a woman that started Corcoran Sunshine Real Estate. I have a lot of respect for her. And she came out in March and said the minute those rates come down, all hell's going to break loose. Now, she's talking about this on a national basis. I'm talking to all of you about South Florida, where the demand is so much more extraordinary than any other part of the United States. And supply is so much more restricted than any other part of the United States. So please take into account that she is forecasting what she thinks is going to happen with prices on a national basis. If all hell breaks loose all over the U.S., well, your guess is as good as mine what may happen here in South Florida. From here, we go to new construction. And I start with this map, which shows all of the new construction properties that are being developed throughout South Florida. As far south as Coconut Grove, as far north as Pompano and Hillsborough. I think at the end of Q4 last year, there were some 66 total buildings that we had on the previous map. Now we're down to 104. We divided these in 2 categories. The pink are traditional condos. Those are condominiums with rental restrictions. Once a month, twice a year, once a year, rental restrictions. The blue category are these short-term rentals. They could be Airbnb, short-term rentals, no restrictions on rents, powered by Airbnb, or a branded condo hotel. Nevertheless, the blue category is what we put under the short-term rental category. From here, we're going to show you what actually got built. A year ago, there were 12 projects that were going vertical. There were 66 being promoted, but only 12 were going vertical. Developers were waiting for borrowing costs to drop, which we're still waiting for, but more particularly, they were waiting for commodity costs to flatten out, concrete, glass, and steel. They finally have. So we've increased the number of projects that are being offered for sale from 66 to 104. Well, here's some other good news. We've also started building more condos. What was 12 last year is now 24 this year. Yeah, there are 24 out of the 104 that are actually going vertical. And that's mostly due to the fact that commodity costs, concrete, glass, and steel, have become a lot more predictable. And the proof is in the pudding. We separated what is going vertical with between the short-term rentals and the traditional condos. In terms of short-term rentals, with 10,000 being offered for sale, that's all Miami Beach and Port Lauderdale needs. But what we don't have enough of are the traditional condos. When you look at the 24 buildings, the 5,692 that are actually under construction, there's only 3,117. Let me round up and call them 3,000. Condos that are actually going vertical. Folks, not nearly enough. Let me show you why. This next slide shows how many condos were built in the first decade of this decade, the 2000s. From 2000 to 2007-8, because everything stopped in 08 because of what happened in 08, there were almost 59,000 condos that got built and delivered in Miami, Miami Beach, and Port Lauderdale. Way too many. But they all got sold, people are living them, and everyone lived happily ever after. In the next decade, the decade we just came out of, starting really in 2012, we built just under 20,000 condos. Again, Miami, Miami Beach, and Port Lauderdale, and they all got sold. This is my personal opinion, but having done this research for the Miami Report for over 15 years, that is the exact number you need to meet population increases. 20,000 units matches the amount of people that are moving here. Get second homes, never get investment sales from South America. We're talking about people that are moving here permanently. You need to build nearly 20,000 just to accommodate that. In this cycle, as you can see, starting in this decade, which began in 2021, there are 10,278 traditional condos being promoted. There's only 3,117 going vertical, not 20,000 from the last decade. We are grossly underserved when it comes to inventory. And based on the next slide, Aston Martin, I'm going to show you these take time. There's 3,117 under construction. Some developers will tell you, don't worry about that number. We're gonna build. We're gonna have things delivered by the end of the decade. And I say, well, that's nice to hear, but we'll see. Aston Martin is a beautiful building. It's 65, 70 stories on Government Cut, downtown Miami. I mean, when you look at the architecture, it's an absolute sculpture. They finally got their TCO last week after 6.5 years of marketing, selling, and building. 6.5 years. Is it going to take every 70-story building 6.5 years to build? No, but it's a decent guide. So when Craig Studnicki sits here and says, I think that 3,117 units are probably all we're going to get in this decade, that's why. The buildings that haven't gone vertical, they're going to take 4 or 5 years to build, assuming nothing goes wrong. That gets us right to 2029. I'm saying 29, 30. We're looking for a strong next decade. Although I sure would love to see these developers right now with these buildings that are being pre-sold find a way to build, because we certainly need the inventory. Here's a slide with some groundbreaking news that I thought you would enjoy. God knows I do. It certainly makes for nice fodder at a cocktail party. So Ken Griffin last year bought the Adrian Arts compound in Coconut Grove for a record $106 million. Ken Griffin's also planning on building the most expensive home in the world in Palm Beach, valued at somewhere around $1 billion. No one's seen the plans, but I'm sure all interested to see what $1 billion gets you. Jeff Bezos, Mr. Amazon, he's just bought his third mansion on Indian Creek. He's buying them almost like it's a hobby. I think we're going to end up changing the name from Indian Creek to Bezos Creek if he keeps buying those houses there. He already owns $147 million worth of property just on Indian Creek before he bought the third mansion. Related Group sold 2 penthouses on Fisher Island for north of $150 million. The Surf Club, Four Seasons on the beach in Surfside, just sold a penthouse for a record $44 million, which tops off at around $6,200 a foot. And this one I love the most from Bloomberg. Coral Gables tops Beverly Hills as the richest neighborhood in the U.S. But some think it's really Palm Beach. Either way, it belongs to us here in South Florida. So take a bow. We're starting to get the attention of a lot of people around the world, perhaps even creating a little FOMO, huh? Look at the $20 million condos. Before 2020, 3, 4, 5 per year. Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County combined. Last year, we sold almost 30 condos on the ocean for north of 20 million. Gives you some idea of the kind of money that is moving almost permanently to South Florida. By the way, most of those sales were cash. I know, I looked it up. But still, once we get past all the groundbreaking or the shiny object conversations, this one I thought was of particular interest. When we looked at all of the resales that took place last year, houses and condos combined, 85% all fell within 500,000 to 1.5 million. Yes, we love to talk about the shiny objects. We like to talk about Jeff Bezos and Ken Griffin and the 26 condos that sold on the beach for more than 20 million. But most of the money that was made brokering real estate took place between 500,000 and 1.5 million. Yes, we're running out of that inventory, but still, I thought it was worth you knowing about. Now let's turn the coin and get to demand. We're starting with this world population clock. This we're borrowing from the United Nations. This is live from the UN, which shows the population increases of the world as I'm presenting the Miami Report to you right now. What's particularly interesting to me is the big number, 8,104,000,000 people and growing. because when you look at the next slide, what you see is how the top three organize themselves. The fastest growing country in the world by population is India. Number two is China. Number three is the US. We've been number three for close to 20 years. But look at the next piece of information before we go to the next slide. In 1920, there were 1.5 billion people living on the planet Earth. Yeah, 100 years ago, that's how many human beings we finally recorded on the planet. In 2023, last year, 8.1 billion. That means you added 6.6 billion people in the last 100 years. Your ancestors, mine, they've been walking this planet for tens of thousands of years, a long time. To add over 6 billion people in the last 100 years, demographers, people that study population growth, called exponential growth. My daughter asked me, Dad, what do you think the world will look like 100 years from now? I joked to her, I don't know. I wonder what it's going to look like 25 years from now. Where are all these people going? Because remember, number three in this world expansion of people is the United States. California and Texas and Florida flirt with the first and second positions all the time. Last year it was Texas followed by Florida. The year before that it was Florida followed by Texas. So 1 and 2 are getting the biggest bites out of the third fastest growing country in the world. Look what happened last year. Last year it showed Texas growing at number 1, Florida number 2, North Carolina was number 3. But look at the bottom 3. No wonder that those are the top 3 feeder markets that are moving into South Florida. Number 50 of all states, the great state of New York, lost 279 people a day. California lost 206. Illinois lost 90. Now, what does all these losses mean? The Census Bureau, it's pretty simple math. They measure people being born, and they subtract the people who died. They add people moving into a state with tax returns and driver's licenses. They subtract people moving out of a state the same way with tax returns and driver's licenses. And the net is X. And X last year for New York made them number 50. X for California last year made them 49. X for Illinois made them 48 out of 50 states. By the way, those are the same bottom 3 from 2022 as well. People are leaving those states, and a lot of them are coming here. And why? Well, let's go to the demand underpinnings. First reason is always our climate. We have what I think the nicest climate in the world, particularly in the month of May, which is when we're recording this report right now. It's a lie. I would much rather be outside doing almost anything. It's that kind of a day here in South Florida. The second big reason is Latin America. In 2022, we saw a big drop in Latin American sales here in South Florida due to, the effects of 2020, their own currency devaluations, which occurred in part because of quantitative easing. They printed a lot of cash too, just like the United States. But this is the biggest reason. Every single country has elected a leader that, as I've said kind of jokingly, makes Joe Biden look like Ronald Reagan. These blue arrows that are pointing to the left, they're not socialists, they're borderline communists. And they're completely undermining the value of the currencies. And more than that, the belief and the faith that the citizens of these countries have in their own countries. So the idea is, let's get the money out as soon as we can before it devalues even more. The only country that is not to the left is now Argentina. They elected Javier Milei, I guess now about 6 or 7 months ago. He's trying like crazy to fight the runaway inflation in Argentina, perhaps even convert the Argentine peso to the US dollar. Let's give the guy some time. You don't change the conditions of Argentina overnight. But still, it's encouraging to know that they elected a guy with a big brain who's trying. Third reason is Tax Reform 17. Donald Trump passed Tax Reform 17 in his first year of presidency when he controlled all 3 houses of Washington, the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Barack Obama did the same thing with Obamacare. But when in 17 he passed Tax Reform 17, which showed the biggest benefit going to Florida and Texas, and the countries that benefited, the states that benefited the least were California and New York. It's expensive to live in California and New York. There is no state income tax in states like Florida in Texas, which explains another reason why so many people, particularly high-income earners, make Florida their homestead instead of places where they're getting socked. The next one would be the South Florida corporate relocations. A year ago, we had Mayor Francis Suarez at our Miami report, and his efforts in convincing various companies that South Florida is not only open for business, but we're welcoming to all kinds of entrepreneurs and businesses to come here and take advantage of our beautiful climate and our robust business attitudes. Well, a year ago, there were 134 companies that he successfully recruited. Some of them you see on this board: Elliott, Blackstone, Carl Icahn, Citadel, Goldman Sachs. I read in the paper today, just expanded their operation in Fort Lauderdale. A year ago, 134, now 204. Folks, we're in momentum. The companies that are moving here from all four corners of the U.S., they're in momentum. It's 204 now. It won't surprise me if that grows by another 100 companies in the next 12 months. Because it's not just companies like Citadel. Oftentimes they're companies that service companies like Citadel. That too is in momentum. Taking a little break in this presentation to show you a film clip from a very famous movie from 1989. It's called Field of Dreams, starring Kevin Costner. Now, most of you think this is a comedy/baseball movie, unless, of course, you allow yourself to watch it to the end, where I promise you, you will need a box of tissues. But this particular part of my Miami report is for the developers that are watching this presentation. Take a listen. So to the developers watching this, here's a hint. They're coming. They're really coming. You've got to build. It's the ironic twist was for all of you because they really are coming. You saw the earlier part of our presentation when we talked about condominium supply. When you discount out the condos that are over 30 years of age that do have a problem with the cash in the reserve for replacement accounts, we don't have much inventory here. People are coming. They've been coming. They haven't been coming since 2020, and they haven't been coming just since the turn of this century. Oh no, they've been coming for quite a long time. We found this particular presentation on the internet. This lasts about 45 seconds, but this is the end of the Miami Report presentation and does a perfectly good job of explaining the depth and breadth of the population growth and the momentum that Florida is enjoying. 100 years ago, there were 107 million people living in the United States. Today, that number has tripled. And Florida was, 100 years ago, wasn't even in the top 20. Let's take a look at how Florida has become such an important state in the U.S. since 1920 right through 2023. Here we go. Okay, here we go from 1920 right to 2023. Let's watch Florida. She's nowhere to be found right now, but check out the top 5 or 6. New York is firmly number 1. It is the most populated state in the country. California is number 5. Texas is number 6. The top 5, 6 don't change much until we get close to 1950. Because right around 1949 is when Florida finally pops up at the bottom. In fact, there she comes. And in the 50s, you know what happened? We invented air conditioning. All of a sudden, it was pretty pleasant living in Florida year-round, and Florida went from 20 all the way to number 10 by 1960. Also, look at the early 60s. California just replaced New York as the most populated state in the country. Texas is number 5. New York and Pennsylvania kind of holding on for dear life, particularly as Texas just passed New York. Check out Florida. Florida has now found itself like number 8 in the country. In the 70s, we developed more inexpensive air travel. So that combined with now Central Air, a lot of people are discovering Florida. My God, we're now already in the top 5 and it's only the 80s. We're approaching the 90s when South America, the entire continent, discovered Florida. It wasn't just for the wealthy anymore. It was for the middle class and upper middle class of most of South America, and they're making a big difference in the population of Florida. By the way, Texas just passed New York, as the second most populated state in the country. As we get close to 2012, Florida, be nice as you wave goodbye to New York. Yeah, Florida passes New York in 2012. The big three have established themselves: California, Texas, and Florida. New York remains number 4. Looks like Illinois is about to even pass Pennsylvania as we slide into 2023. So the big three, you've got California at around 40 million, you've got Texas at just over 30 million, you got Florida at just over 23 million. Where does it go from here? Well, certainly more. Again, we're talking about the third fastest growing country in the world. You're selling real estate in the second fastest growing state, in the third fastest growing country. Not trying to overwhelm you with a bunch of riddles here. The population is growing mightily, and we don't have a lot of inventory. So the last slide of our Miami report is simply this: we're asking developers to find a way to build. Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami has been telling me for the last 3 or 4 years that his deep concern for South Florida is we might become a victim of our own success, which means we become the most popular real estate market in the United States, one of the most talked about markets in the entire world. We don't have enough housing. We also don't have enough seats in private schools and charter schools, but that's another issue. We've got to start building. To the developers in South Florida, please, on behalf of all the people who are moving here, and certainly my fellow realtors, find a way. Looking forward to seeing everybody at the end of Q2. God knows things are always changing in South Florida. I'm sure we'll have some fresh updates for you then. Until then, bye-bye.